Hello, everybody. So today we're going to read Thrasymachus on Justice and Power, some problems of interpretation by Lycos in his Plato on Justice and Power, reading book 1 of Plato's Republic. So let's start. Philosophers and scholars have debated for long the nature and import of Thrasymachus's views. More recent commentators have tended to concentrate on the propositional content of Thrasymachus's pronouncements, seeking to identify his doctrine by exhaustive elimination of various alternatives. This procedure can yield important insights. Yet Guthrie is surely right to emphasize the danger of neglecting, quote, the dramatic situation and emotional intentions between the speakers. Whether he is also right in claiming that, quote, the driving force behind Thrasymachus is passionate feeling rather than philosophical inquiry remains to be seen. So, Lycos is opening with Guthrie agreeing with him in regards that logic is not the whole aspect. And secondly, so he's emphasizing the dramatical aspect. And then secondly, the task of this chapter is to show that while there are difficulties in interpreting Thrasymachus's views consistently, Plato represents him as having a consistent and coherent attitude. But the driving force, whether he is also right that the driving force behind Thrasymachus is passionate feeling rather than philosophical inquiry remains to be seen. The task of this chapter is to show that while there are difficulties in interpreting Thrasymachus's views consistently, Plato represents him. So Plato, according to Lycos, represents Thrasymachus as having a consistent and coherent attitude to justice. The rhetorical effect built into his speeches is that of rejecting the need to understand justice as an object of moral knowledge. So we are rejecting to understand justice as a form of moral knowledge. Thrasymachus aims to cut off just conduct from the domain of the admirable, and does so by suggesting that the true nature of just conduct can only be grasped from the perspective of power. So Thrasymachus is cutting off just conduct from the domain of the admirable. And the true nature of justice can only be grasped from power. So this reminds me of something, and let me see if I can find it. So there is a quote, and it's about equal power position. Let's see if we can find it. Now, I can't find the citation for this. So, but it does seem to be coming up. Let's see now. So I'm just going to read from Goodreads. Don't kill me. I didn't have this on hand, but I will find a citation for this, or I'll correct this in the comments, okay? Anyway, Nietzsche says that the doctrine of equality, there is no more poisonous poison anywhere, for it seems to be preached by justice itself, whereas it really is the termination of justice. Equal to the equal, unequal to the unequal. That would be the true slogan of justice, and also its corollary: never make equal what is unequal. That this doctrine of equality was surrounded by such gruesome and bloody events that has given this modern idea par excellence a kind of glory and fiery aura that the revolution as a spectacle has seduced. But that's not the one. So, justice, power, quote Nietzsche. There's a quote by Nietzsche where he says basically something similar, that justice only emerges when there's two, yes. According to Nietzsche, fairness originates among those who are basically of the same, have the same amount of power. But anyway, I'll see if I can find the quote from Nietzsche. Okay, let's continue with this. So basically, the true nature of justice can only be grasped from a perspective of power. From this, the perspective one can see clearly. So let's just stop this here, right? The question is why. And yesterday I was thinking a lot. I've been having conversations with a friend of mine who's interested in psychoanalysis. And I think that, why is this the case? Realism, cynicism, honesty, and suspicion are all here in this conversation. Why does Thrasymachus aim to cut off the conduct from the domain of the admirable, and does so by suggesting that the true nature of just conduct? Because, is there a sort of empiricism from Thrasymachus here? Like, Thrasymachus, you can imagine somebody like Machiavelli, or the elite theorists, or Foucault, or Carl Schmitt just coming up to us and just saying, look, come on, lads, let's just stop the philosophy here, and let's just be real about this. Let's just be honest. Let's just look out into the world. Law, for example. What we say or what we think of as just is bound up in our time. Now, it might just give us the appearance of justice. But when we talk about justice, we're automatically talking about morals that a democracy or a government uphold, and they call that are just. And we figure out what justice is through the law. But law is the language of power. Jurisprudence. So is Thrasymachus here being honest, realistic, suspicious of grand philosophical claims or any philosophical claim? Or is he just being a cynic? From this perspective, one can see clearly why the conventional praise of justice is not an expression of genuine admiration. If Thrasymachus, and then, justice as convention. Okay. If Thrasymachus is right to seek moral understanding of justice is pointless and wrong-headed from the start, one does not have to explain why justice is an unqualified good, given that those who praise it do not do so because they admire it itself. The fact which moral theory sets out to explain it is not even a fact. There are two important dramatic indications that this resistance to a moral knowledge of justice is built into the characterization of Thrasymachus. Okay, so all of this to do is basically to do with moral knowledge. So, from this perspective, one can see why the controversial praise of justice, conventional praise of justice, is not an expression of genuine admiration. So the normal praise of justice is not expression of genuine admiration. If Thrasymachus is right to seek moral understanding of justice, his justice is pointless and wrong-headed from the start. One does not have to explain why justice is an unqualified good, given that those who praise it do not so because they admire it in itself. The fact that moral theory sets out to explain is not even a fact. There are two important dramatical indications that this resistance to a moral knowledge of justice is built into the characteristic of Thrasymachus. First, the emotion with which Plato marks his entrance to the discussion is impatient indignation at the way Socrates and Polemarchus have been discussing. And secondly, Thrasymachus makes it clear that his indignation is due to the conviction that Socrates' method of inquiry is wrong-headed. Socrates' pretense of ignorance, his asking questions, are but a sly technique to show off a different approach is needed. Thrasymachus believes Socrates is asking the wrong kind of question about justice, and he forbids him the use of certain formula when he demands that Socrates state clearly and precisely what justice is. The forbidden formula only leads to rubbish. Later, when Socrates persists in examining Thrasymachus' views in the usual way, the latter, though embarrassed by his defeat in argument, remains unconvinced and loses interest in the discussion. His final words to Socrates are sarcastic. Well, this can be your holiday treat. So, Lycos is using the different aspects of the debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus. So the first thing that he's done is he's explained. He's annoyed with Socrates' methodology, particularly. So let's write that down. Okay. First, the emotion with which Plato marks the entrance is impatient indignation with Socrates. Thrasymachus makes clear that indignation is due to the conviction of Socrates' method of inquiry is wrong-headed. Socrates' pretense of ignorance has his asking questions are but a sly technique to show off a different approach is needed. Thrasymachus believes Socrates is asking the wrong kind of question. So Socrates is asking wrong question. So is there a sort of incommensurability between Socrates and Thrasymachus? What do these dramatic indications reveal? And what is the basis? So what do these dramatic indications represent? And what is the basis of Thrasymachus' rejection? So what is the reason Thrasymachus rejects a certain mode of inquiry into the nature of justice. Okay. So, yes, so Thrasymachus is rejecting Socrates' approach. And if you are going to, and what I'm saying is, like, there's a sort of, later we'll see it, an egoism, an honesty, a realism, a suspicion, a cynicism, an empirical observation, facts that are going on. You know, he's operating with a certain attitude or certain paradigm. So this is all just about the background of this paragraph. What appears to be true of both the actual Thrasymachus and the character in the dialogue is the passionate interest in the question of justice. In discussing Thrasymachus' speech, I shall assume that the beliefs of the attitudes he expressed belong to the character. Thrasymachus is not said to be a sophist, nor is his characterization one Plato usually employs when presenting sophists. The latter are often made gentle fun of, but they are never portrayed as rude or uncouth. More importantly, Thrasymachus does not advance the sort of theoretical position one associates with the sophist. The linking of his views with the distinction between things that are by nature and those that are by convention is not done by Thrasymachus but Glaucon in the Republic. Nevertheless, this does not rule out the possibility that some ideas loosely associated with sophistic movement did form part of the background of Thrasymachus' attitude to justice. The full detail of the important and fascinating thought of the sophists had brought to bear on moral, political, and social issues is beyond the scope of this study. In any case, it does not seem to have been part of that thought to urge that justice and other moral qualities are inextricably bound up with relations of power. Thrasymachus does want to insist on this. It does not seem to have been part of the thought that urges at justice. So, in order to understand justice according to Lycos' view of Thrasymachus is Thrasymachus, in order to understand justice, one first needs to know the realities of power. Thrasymachus does want to insist on this. It may be, of course, that Thrasymachus' views in the Republic represent a reaction. So Thrasymachus is a reactionary. To the cultural and political developments in Greece in the latter half of the 5th century, and that the theories of the sophists were attempts to theorize the implications of these developments. But it does not follow from this that Thrasymachus' view is such a theoretical response. People often promulgate opinions they think accord with vaguely understand theories without themselves having a theoretical interest in the matter. Thrasymachus' view may relate to the sophistic ideas only in that manner. The socio-political developments in Greek city-states had occasioned sophistic speculation about the nature and origin of social organizations and moral conduct. They may also have given rise to a new expression of old doubts about the way justice and other cooperative virtues related to excellence. Thus, though the person of power and excellence, the Aristos typified by the heroes of Homeric poems, was expected to dispense justice among those inferior and dependent on him, it was not clear how much the Aristos saw justice to be part of his own excellence. But the development of the polis had highlighted, as we saw, the need for justice to regulate social relationship in society, the need to regard justice as required for a good citizen. The problem of how to relate the goodness of a citizen to the goodness of a person, a pressing issue as Adkins, could easily be seen as a new version of an old problem. Justice may be required for life in the polis. What reason does one have for thinking it should be admired? Okay, so justice may be a requirement for life in the polis, but what reason does one have for thinking that it should be admired? This applies especially to the powerful on whom the enforcement of justice in the polis depends. Because it is the powerful who are going to, in many ways, enforce justice. Okay, depended just as much as it did in the old tribal setting. The idea that justice enables individuals and communities to achieve certain ends does not, by itself, show that these ends to be excellent or to be part of what the powerful regard as belongs to the life of excellence. The confrontation between Socrates and Thrasymachus, the emotional tensions between them, is not primarily that which modern philosophers regard as a conflict between duty and interest. Essentially, it is a clash between two concepts of the sources of political power. Plato is well aware that behind the moral skepticism about whether justice is more beneficial to the agent than injustice lurks the suspicion that it is injustice, not justice, which makes people more powerful. So the moral skepticism that of justice that T has is a suspicion that it is injustice, not justice, that makes people powerful. Okay. Paradoxically, Socrates and Thrasymachus agree that in assessing the value of justice, one cannot avoid considering whether it is an empowering quality. It is because they disagree in the answers they each give to this question and about what power really is that they disagree about justice. Power and relations of power naturally introduce the political dimension of justice. This was noted by one of the commentators a long time ago. Others have talked of a contrast in Thrasymachus' discussion between the ideal and the actual, between is and ought, between fact and prescription, and so on. It is dubious whether such contrasts would or could have been in Plato's mind, though they are important if Thrasymachus is proposing a theory of justice from which he obtains an evaluation of it. It does not seem that Plato intends to present Thrasymachus as a primary theorist. No doubt it is possible to theorize what Thrasymachus says, but this does not mean that he thinks of himself as doing so, or what Plato intends us to understand him that way. The issue revolves around how he interprets Thrasymachus' reference to the stronger in his characterization of justice. To understand the force of this reference, we need to look at Thrasymachus' reasoning for rejecting certain traditional formulae about justice. So, interpret his idea of the stronger. Okay, Plato gives us a clue about the nature of his rejection. By having Socrates engage in a somewhat puzzling exchange with Thrasymachus just prior to the latter's declaration that justice is nothing but the interest of the stronger. The exchange deserves closer attention than it has received. If Socrates really, hos atelos, wants to understand justice, claims Thrasymachus, he should state clearly and precisely what he thinks it is. He should avoid saying that it is obligatory, or expedient, or beneficial, or profitable. To this, Socrates protests that Thrasymachus is like one forbidding answers to the question about how much is 12 of the form twice I 6. If one thinks these answers true, why should one not give them a response to this question? Thrasymachus sneers at the analogy, and later when Socrates suggests that Thrasymachus' own formula about justice employs one of the forbidden formulae, abiding, adding the stronger to it, Thrasymachus makes it clear that he takes this qualification to make all the difference. Okay, I've got to go, and I will read from the next one, page 43 next time. Take care.